All right, what's good, people? This is ZenSphere back again with another RENOISE tutorial. Today we are going to be taking a look at how to achieve granular synthesis inside of RENOISE. Just for a quick demonstration, granular synthesis can sound like many things, but it can sound like this. So you get the idea. There's a lot of potential for sound shaping with granular synthesis techniques. And let's just dive right into it. The basis of this technique involves using our sample offset command in conjunction with phrases. To begin, let's just load up a sample. And let's just grab something here. It doesn't really matter what it is. And I'm going to trim this down and normalize it. And let's just get this kind of high frequency section here. Okay, so we've got a sound here. And as is usual, we can play it back at different speeds. But as you see, there's an index across the top here in hexadecimal from 00 to FF, which is unmarked. And this is our reference for our sample offset commands. If we say input a note at C4 and then use our S command, this is telling it, S00 is telling it to play from the beginning, as you may well be aware, or maybe you don't know. But if we put in, say, 80 there, it's telling it to play from the halfway point. So if we go there and look, we can see that it's starting at 80 on our playback. This is useful for kind of getting more mileage out of your samples, changing the attack characteristics or, accessing different parts of the samples. And, this is kind of basic sample manipulation within RENOISE. But if we say we fill our pattern with notes here, do it the slow way, then we have basically a repeating playhead with one starting at the 40 mark and the rest starting at the 0 mark. So what we can do is we can say put this to S00 and then go to our endpoint of our phrase. This is a pattern. And we'll put SFF in. And then we can select this, to select this entire column, hit F9, and we can interpolate the data with Control I for a linear interpolation. Excuse me, it's early, my brain and tongue still aren't quite online. And then you can see that interpolation automatically fills all the values between 00 and FF. And then if we play this, it plays through the sample kind of normally, but now it's tied to our tempo. So we can use this for time stretching effects. By changing the BPM. Now, there's more that we can do with this, obviously. We could use other effect commands. For instance, let's put in our B command, and I'm just going to do this the slow way. We'll just populate this with B's, B for backwards. And now when we play it, we're playing our sample essentially in reverse. Kind of fun. And say we reversed our sample. We're playing forwards again, but this time we're going using a backwards sample played backwards, which makes it forwards. So the technique that I figured out, and I'm sure other people have figured this out, is that you can offload this into our instrument phrases. And because we have access to multiple note columns, we can actually have multiple playheads scrubbing through a sample simultaneously. I believe the limitation is 12. The limitation is 12 note columns, but I believe there's kind of a hard limitation of 12 instances of a sample playing simultaneously. So you could theoretically have 12 playheads playing simultaneously, although perhaps in practice it doesn't quite work out this way. So let's do this with a phrase here. So we've got our C, and let's just go ahead and put our S command in there. And we're going to increase our phrase count to, let's say, 80. The number doesn't really matter. It can be arbitrary. This is in hex, so it's 8 16s. And I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go to the next line, and I'll hit Control P or Command P to populate, or what is it? Paste continuously, I think is what it actually stands for. I always think of it as populate. And then we can, in the phrases, it's handy because the arrow keys just wrap around. You can easily access your last cell. And I put in FF there, and I'm going to use our granular selection, which is, at least on Mac, it's Option while holding Shift. And then we're going to interpolate here linearly. And let's go back to our pattern and just delete this pattern. So now, when we press a key, because it's stored in the phrase, we have our our kind of scrubbing through the sample, right? And we can use this in various ways, of course, but we can throw an amplitude envelope on here, and this will change the playback characteristics. Because you can see that those tails are kind of accumulating and adding to each other. So you get some kind of interesting, almost like flanging phasing effects. And you can see there's a line, I believe it's of 12 playheads. And we can change the attack characteristics as well. If it gets too slow, you can't hear anything. But this kind of softens our grains. So I should explain that in granular synthesis, we're working with grains, which are essentially small snippets of sound on the order of 1 to 100 milliseconds, I think is usually what's considered granular. And these snippets can be manipulated in various ways. And that's, essentially the technique. Now, you can, as I was saying, you can have multiple playheads. So say, for instance, we copied this whole column here and duplicated it. Oops. I should just use the wraparound. And then, let's change our sample offset command. Let's have this one start at FF and this one end at 0, 0. And we'll do our granular selection again, and we'll interpolate again. And now we have one playhead moving from front to back, and we have another playhead moving from back to front. And let's deselect this so you can actually see the playheads moving. Right. Kind of interesting. And if you slow it down, you can get some really rhythmic effects. So this principle can be useful for sound design generally. If you get some external recording of your audio output. So that's granular synthesis in a nutshell. Depending on how you set up your S sample offset commands, your SSX commands, you can specify how you want the playback to proceed within a given waveform. The nice thing about this technique is that you can drop any sample in there. It doesn't matter what it is, and you'll get different results depending on the sample. And let's change our amplitude characteristics here. And so we have kind of like a pitch independent time stretching effect that's pretty easily achievable just by offloading that work to a phrase. Now, what I've done is I've created a granular synthesis instrument, which I call the Regranulizer, and it does just that. I've populated every note column with a different phrase that acts as a different kind of playhead. So you can see with this one, there are actually 3 simultaneous playheads operating. One is going from start to end of the sample. Another one is going from the start to the end, which is offset. And then we have one that's playing from start to the end, but it's playing backwards. So it actually begins kind of at the same place as the first playhead, but the direction of playback is backwards. So you can see some of these playheads moving forward and some of them moving backwards, which I think creates a really nice, interesting effect. I've also mapped various parameters to macros. Some of the amplitude envelope characteristics are here in grain, attack, decay, and shape. There's also an ability to spread the panning of the grains from a central position to a more or less random distribution towards the sides with this pan spreading. We can do a similar thing with the pitch detune, where we introduce random pitch variation to the grains. Pitch level just controls the pitch level, as you would think. And I've got a low pass filter set up here and some reverb dry wet just for ambiance. Now you'll notice down here that we have a variety of phrases. And these phrases, some of them play back pretty quickly. which can give rise to some interesting effects. And then some of them play back really slowly. You can see how slowly this one is working its way across the sample. If we, you know, say trim our sample, then we'll get a little more volume here. This can be useful for rhythmic effects. Now this grain shape knob, kind of towards the beginning of the value range, it's more staccato. Towards the center, it's more of a smooth peak. And towards the end, it's more of a solid, massive sound. I can show you actually what it's doing. So you can see how that's impacting the playback characteristics. Pretty fun. And again, you can drop any sample in here really easily and quickly and have a very different kind of sound. Now, this can have some challenges when dealing with large peaks of volume. So you may get some aliasing effects, but they can usually be mitigated by changing your attack characteristics and shape characteristics and filtering. Sorry, this pattern is so slow. And of course, this is all going to be impacted by your BPM. So you can see you can get a variety of interesting tones pretty easily just by manipulating the macros. So I should explain that there are 12 different playheads. These first three run from start to end, with the first two being offset versions of each other, meaning that they're just sort of desynchronized in time. And then we have playheads that scrub from the end of the sample towards the beginning of the sample. Some of them running backwards, some of them running forwards, which is backwards of backwards. So you can see the playheads moving there. And then we have some random playheads as well. There are two random playheads that play forward. Oops, wrong tab. And two random playheads that play backwards. And of course, you can have them all playing together if you want, or just, one or two of them. Pretty fun. Depending on what your sample material is, it can really change the character of the sound. I mean, some like instant Audacor level Gans graph manipulation. All right? You can throw anything in there and it'll probably be interesting, depending on what you find interesting. And then we also have some ping pong playheads. And by ping pong, I mean kind of like the sample loop mode, where it begins at the beginning and then scrubs back towards the end. I'm going to up the BPM here. Now you can see that there's kind of a swarming behavior with the playheads. To my ear, that just sounds better. I've kind of randomized their playback and position a little bit. So it's not super rigid or precise. But that's just me. You can set it up however you want if you care to do the work to create all these patterns. And then there's also a reverse ping pong that starts at the end and then scrubs back towards the beginning. Now, one downside of this method is that for each individual pattern, you have to assign playheads individually. So if I, say have these, let's choose a different view. Let's say we have this playhead selected at this playback speed. This is 16 lines per beat for 512 lines. And then I switch to another pattern. Right. We're going to go back to the playhead selection for that specific pattern. Now, this can be an advantage or a disadvantage, but basically you have to be aware that if you're changing your playback speed, which is kind of governed by how many lines per beat are in your phrase and how long the phrase is. This first batch of phrases is all 512 lines long, which gives you the finest resolution. That's going to change your sound pretty dramatically. So just be conscious if you're changing it, that you'll want to change all the patterns that you're going to use, or take advantage of that flexibility, and you can have different effects at different playback speeds, essentially. So hope this wasn't too dry. Hope it was exciting for you. Granular synthesis is an awesome technique. You can get a lot of really interesting sounds, a lot of kind of glitched out sounds and crazy pads and atmospheres, just depending on how you approach it. And it can be a lot of fun to mess with. If you're interested in this Regranulizer instrument, you can pick it up at my Gumroad. The link will be in the description below. And yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. And we'll catch you next time. Make lots of music. Peace.